Okay, with that, let's get started. Again, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Patrick Pusher. I'm a technical evangelist here at Dome9, and it's my pleasure to spend about the next, 35 to 45 minutes with you, speaking about how you can obtain really, really effective visualization around your infrastructure as a service efforts. We'll talk a little bit about kind of what's led us to this problem, the problem that, we have this sort of gap in our tool set, in our understanding from our traditional data center now into the public cloud. Sometimes it leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of being able to understand your infrastructure, and some of the paradigms we're now using infrastructure as a service for, things like continuous integration and deployment and immutable infrastructure, only really compound the problem. So we'll talk about that as well. We are in a sort of webinar format, so if you have questions, please do ask them through the questions panel. You're all on mute. There's quite a few of you here, so I will do my best. I'm solo today, so I'll do my best to answer the questions in line or at the end. If I do not, then we will get back to you kind of based on email if you've registered with your email address. Okay, with that being said, let's get started. So today we'll talk a little bit about, what's led us to this problem of, other than, moving kind of environments from our traditional data center to the public cloud, perhaps, what's led us to this challenge of this lack of visibility, this lack of what I call sort of a security situational awareness at all times. And we'll talk about, what does visibility even mean? I think that word to different people means very different things, and so we'll maybe work on a common sort of definition or understanding. And then I'll introduce to you a single Dome9 feature called Clarity that will really kind of revolutionize how you think about visibility, both at a broad kind of how networks relate to each other sort of fashion within AWS, right down to looking at individual security controls and whitelisting, individual scopes or IPs for particular services. So we'll talk about that range of functionality inherent in Clarity. And then we'll wrap up a bit. I'll tell you how you can get started with Dome9, what that process looks like, and what else we offer. So when I think about the sorts of things that have led us to the challenge we have before us, thinking about visibility of effectively our software-defined data center, right? Being able to change resources, to being able to make a resource public that was private or vice versa, being able to change security controls with the flick of a switch or the single line of an automation script means that no longer do we really have this perimeter to trust. We have a perimeter that can change at any time, really not a perimeter at all. Through the use of features like auto-scaling, for example, our perimeter can look very, very different than ever before. And now we have the ability to define through a variety of AWS services to define what our data center looks like in code. If we can do that, that means changing that kind of infrastructure is equally as simple. So it all adds up to a very, very dynamic environment where you have a single control out in front of it for access, and that's kind of a different problem that Dome9 tackles in a different way as well. How we get here is that as we think about traditional networks, I think we really sort of fell back on this notion of securing things at the edge, and then inside, constructing it for efficiency, for performance, and leaving security maybe as a secondary concern because we have these edge defenses. That simply doesn't work when a single change, either in addressing or in a security control, can now expose that. Right? There's nothing between that workload or that service and the public internet other than the controls you put up, the security groups, the network ACLs, the route tables, the conventions you use to send traffic in and out of your VPCs. So what we tend to do is we tend to sort of micro segment our networks using security groups. Certainly a best practice, but it does create this lack of, again, situational security understanding. At any given time, what does every single workload or service that I use in any given VPC look like from an exposure perspective? Has anything happened in my environment, either through a third-party tool, maybe someone logging in at the console not understanding my architecture? Has anything changed in in any of this detail that would, expose a service or a workload in any way to, to data that I'm not, or to eyes that I'm not comfortable with. That's the question that I think we all try to answer, and it's the question probably we largely struggle with, especially as our networks get more and more complex. Right, and then we think not just the complexity of our sort of our technical landscape, but then we think about things like organizations adopting cloud fully, creating what we see in the industry as cloud first policies, right? Driving every single business unit, every single technology initiative to consider the infrastructure as a service use case before anything else. And of course, we know the appeal of that, being able to get started to solve business problems is very, very massive. So we tend to get every business unit kind of adopting the cloud in different ways. And this, again, means that we don't have one overarching policy, for operations, never mind security, that governs all that we do. And that means, we have a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different security control sort of management practices that we need to understand, and then, hopefully that we need to sort of lock down over time. And that's one of the challenges we have, right from deployment all the way through to operation, to scaling, and then to compliance and monitoring is a whole different beast that we probably will talk less about today than everything else. So with that said, let's get our hands on Clarity. I'll pivot now from slideware to actually taking a look at the product hands-on. Okay, so welcome to your Dome9 dashboard. This is what Dome9 looks like for your typical customer. And there's certainly a lot of functionality in Dome9 that speaks to visibility. There's half of these boxes on the screen really do speak to that, that challenge of understanding at an intimate level what your security control detail looks like. But none really that speak to it as directly as a feature we have called Clarity. And so Clarity is a tool that drills down either in a live infrastructure as a service environment, for AWS or Azure, or a sort of a representation of that in code, right? Infrastructure as code. In this case, CloudFormation templates. So you can upload a CloudFormation template, or you can analyze a live environment and get the very same kind of visual that I'm about to show you. In this case, we're going to look at a live environment. So many features in Dome9 kind of work across accounts. You can bring as many accounts, and you can see we have an example of 2 different AWS accounts and 1 Azure account here. You can bring as many of those to Dome9 as you'd like, and some features allow you to manage across them in a very powerful way. Others don't, and Clarity is one that kind of does both. As I choose an account, which I'll do now, and then as I choose a region, the first thing Clarity is going to illustrate for you are all of the VPCs in the region you analyze. And I've got a couple of VPCs down here with sort of no relationships. Well, one EC2 Classic, and then a development VPC. And I'll zoom this up a little bit for readability. But what you see here up top with these blue lines these are the VPC peering relationships between VPCs in your region. And even a little bit outside your region too. So if you have a peered relationship with an account, with a VPC in a different region, or with a VPC even in a different account, you will see it represented. That's what you see with this hyphenated representation of this particular VPC. This is a VPC that is not managed by Dome9, but because you have a peering relationship between VPC1 and this one, we have it outlined in this Clarity perspective for you. The idea is to understand, where information is permitted to flow. When I look at this design, it may look a little bit elaborate, but I can tell you this is a very common architecture where you might have, a VPC to handle traffic in and out, and then, it's sort of intelligent routing based on what sort of traffic it is. Maybe a database traffic gets sent to a dedicated VPC, and so on and so forth. So, this may look elaborate, but it is a very, very common perspective especially for our enterprise customers. And then, once you understand the relationships between VPCs, we can go further. We can pick one, and for this example, we'll pick the main demo VPC. And on the right-hand side, you get sort of a summary of resources you can expect to find in that VPC. But then we're going to choose one of these 2 views at the top right of the screen. And we'll start with Security Group View. And now, rather than looking at sort of VPC to VPC relationships, we're going to look at kind of intra-VPC, what our security controls look like. And so right away, without touching anything, the first kind of initial goal of Clarity is for you to understand which of your AWS or Azure security groups are exposed at the edge, kind of allowing broad internet traffic in, versus those that are, nice and neatly tucked on the internal of your network, really only accepting traffic from other internal hosts to this VPC or other AWS security groups in this VPC. So without clicking a thing, I can tell I have 3 security groups, namely load balancer, web, default, and DB servers in that, kind of red colored DMZ swim lane. We should mention that how you get to this point, right? When you onboard with Dome9, you are not installing agents into workloads. You are not installing appliances to filter traffic through. You are setting up a IAM role and an IAM policy, and you're going to give Dome9 some cross-account role access to that. And that's how we get visibility through the AWS API into your environment. And that's why Dome9 has a much larger perspective than just workload or instance level security, right? Now you see security groups in front of Lambda functions, in front of RDS instances, in front of really any service protected by, that flavor of security control. You will find that Dome9 has knowledge of and can protect very effectively. And this is no different. You come in, you sign up for Dome9, and you can be this effective within 5 minutes because there is no data to load in your environment. So as we enter into Clarity, again, these security groups we find in this DMZ swim lane are here because they have one or more very, very permissive rules in their rule definition, right? These firewalls have rules that are wide open, one or more rules that are wide open to the public internet, and that's a scary thing potentially. In the case of a load balancer, if I click on that security group, I can look at on the right-hand side at the detail pane, and right away we will color code which of the rules really are the offenders. In this case, it's this red port, TCP port 443 HTTPS rule. Now, context is really important. This is a load balancer. If the goal of this VPC is to bring in sort of broad traffic and then judge it where it needs to go in this network, then this is not necessarily a misconfiguration. Yet I have 2 other security groups right below it here called default and DB servers that are here too. So I know they've got one or more rules again that are super permissive. So I click it. In this case, it's a very permissive SSH rule, which in my default security group is a problem. But here I've got my database servers security group with kind of the same condition, a very, very permissive SSH rule. That is a really, really big problem, right? From a best practice perspective, my database security group should really only accept traffic from my web tier, my app tier, maybe my monitoring tier, not the internet at large. No matter if it's SSH or not, right? There should be another way to get to support my database servers than kind of broad internet access. So that's a problem, and Clarity makes that, even without a single click, Clarity makes that painfully evident. And I say painfully because I'll share with you that many of the sort of, pre-sales, does Dome9 work for you kind of calls that we have with potential customers, as they get Clarity into their environment, they will see things for the first time they didn't understand. We're using a nice, concise demo example in our demo, but there's a reason that these controls are sort of zoomable and pannable, and that's because VPCs get very, very complex and get very, very numerous. And so, with a very quick onboarding process, you're able to load up a VPC and understand, how security groups relate to each other. For me, that's the biggest advantage. The AWS and Azure consoles are very powerful in terms of being able to affect change. There's no question there. Where I find Clarity gives me the advantage, though, is being able to understand at a glance, the potential traffic flows through my network. And that's a huge capability, because now I can model, even before I hit production, if this is a CloudFormation template, but even in this example, once I provision, I can model different scenarios. I can say, okay, from a web server security group traffic perspective, where am I allowing traffic from? Okay, not the internet at large. I know that because it's in this partially open swim lane. But when I click on it, suddenly in both a graphical kind of way with the orange and blue lines kind of outlining where ingress and egress traffic is allowed to flow, but also in a text detail way on the right-hand sort of detail pane, I can understand exactly with one click where traffic is potentially, where it can come from and where it can flow out to. And that's really big as I'm planning the security of my network, right? As I'm architecting this and supporting this through massive potential change, I can now at a moment's glance determine what's exposed, even for things that aren't exposed, what is the potential path of traffic? So we've talked a little bit about understanding how VPCs relate to one another in peering relationships, even across accounts in peering relationships. We've talked a little bit about that Clarity is equally suitable for, the analysis of a live environment as it is for the analysis of a 2B environment represented in a CloudFormation template. And we've talked now a little bit about kind of what this initial view gives you, both without clicking, really anything, but then also with working through the interactive nature of Clarity, kind of clicking on security groups. And let me bring up this legend just so it's a little easier to understand what you're looking at. Clicking through security groups, understanding both on the right-hand side, what it is in terms of detail, where the traffic's allowed to flow, assignment. So resource assignment to security group you can find out here as well. Right? So security groups in the partially open, they differ from those in the DMZ in that there's some whitelisted sort of traffic being permitted from the outside, but you won't find any kind of wide open ports or any rules, right? Those will all be in the DMZ. So sort of less permissive, but still accepting traffic from the outside will be found in partially open. And then back in the internal zone, we talked about truly internal security groups not accepting traffic from any outside source. Effectively internal is a really interesting category. It stands out as being, calling out that these security controls have permissive rules associated with them, yet the resources assigned to them lack public interfaces. So Web Monitor has one instance, and I can see that instance is called Monitoring 2. That instance does not have a public interface. No route, from the outside to that instance, to that workload exists. Yet, the security controls would be very permissive if that wasn't the case. So, we think of it as your sort of one small configuration step, one small flick of a switch, or one small API capability away from potentially exposing data that you hadn't anticipated. So that's the idea and the intent behind that effectively internal category. But that's the idea. At a moment's glance, understand how security groups relate to each other and understand all the potential traffic flow possibilities in your AWS network. Okay. So one of the things you might notice about the left-hand side is that these traffic sources, right, as I'm clicking through, I'm able to understand where traffic's allowed to flow from. These traffic sources don't look like you might expect. And really what you might expect looks probably more like this, where all of the, and let me shrink this legend here for readability, all of the information you put in your security group rules, right? Your whitelists, your IP address that you're allowing traffic in on, those will be listed as traffic sources on the left-hand side. That's kind of what Clarity does. But why this illustration here in our demo VPC looks a little bit different is that we've organized those IP addresses into what we call list objects. And these lists, partner extranet SRV1, for example, if I click it, I will see in the right-hand detail pane all of the IP addresses contained therein, and even some annotation ability around describing these IPs. The whole intent here is really twofold, right? One is that we want to prevent you from needing other tools just to make sense of what Clarity is showing you. The whole idea of Clarity is immediate understandability. So if you have a bunch of IP addresses as traffic sources that you need an IP justification spreadsheet, for example, to even understand, how immediately understandable is your security posture? I would argue not so well. So the first goal is that you can organize that information, you can describe it, and put it into these list objects. Then these objects are what you use in the definition of your security policy. So another way to say it is that this monitoring security group in Dome9 actually has this partner extranet SRV1 as a traffic source. That is something you can do in Dome9. Under the covers, we will push the format of information that AWS expects, namely the individual IPs in those lists, right, to make up what that security group entails. But in Dome9, it'll always be represented with that list object. And so the first goal is immediate understandability. Right away I know that, okay, I've got 4 IPs, they belong to my partner network. That's the level of privilege I've given to partners into sort of my network, right? But secondly, it's also a security at scale sort of feature whereby if I have an additional partner join, tomorrow, I can add their IP address to this list, and doing so will propagate that IP to everywhere I've used this list in my rule definition with Dome9. So no longer do I have to hunt and peck through my networks to say, okay, I've given my partners this access previously, I guess I'll have to give this new one the same. I can simply add their IP address to this list object and have that work done for me by Dome9, right? Wherever I've referenced this list, have it get propagated out really, really nicely and effortlessly. So it's a understandability and readability feature, kind of the design intent of Clarity, but it's also very much a security at scale feature as well. And so that's called IP list objects. So, so far we've really spoken about Clarity in this sort of security, configuration, consistency sort of light, right? Being able to determine in a great amount of detail, especially for a graphical tool, and in a Visio kind of traffic flow map sort of way, where I can effectively send traffic through my network. What's missing, though, potentially, is one factor that we have the alternative view for, and that is called your effective policy. If I bring in a new instance or a new service, anything that takes security groups as kind of its firewalling mechanism, and I assigned the wrong combination of security groups to that resource, even though I've got the architecture, the potential of information flow fully understood, I can really change the dynamic of my VPC. If I bring up a database server, for example, and I assign it to DB servers, but I also assign it to mistakenly to my load balancer or to my common SG, I am going to expose I have more risk there than I would if I had done it properly and simply assigned my server to DB servers, right? So in these scenarios where we are using multiple tiers of security group assignment, maybe one tier has to do with the OS itself, maybe one tier has to do with the administrative tools like RDP or SSH or anything else that I use, defines those, and then maybe the third tier is about what my application needs for ports. If I do that, then suddenly I've got a more complex scenario than something that can be illustrated kind of ideally through this view. So for that, and you will notice that there are numbers on the top right of each security group. That is how many resources you have assigned to it. So in common SG, I have 6. They happen to be all instances, 6 instances assigned to it. But it doesn't tell me where these resources might be assigned to multi-security groups, and that's what we have for our effective policy view. So this view gets a little more complicated. No longer are you looking at distinct security groups. You're now looking at groups of common policy. So, whereby this last view, you show me that my load balancer is here, show me that I have a default, and show me that I had DB servers in this view. It didn't really tell me what resources I had assigned, to these security groups. And more importantly, it didn't tell me where I had resources assigned to more than one security group. For example, if we look here in this partially open swim lane still, and I'll zoom up a bit on here so we can see well, what this little box means that I've highlighted is that we have 2 resources. That's what the number 2 in the top right means. In this case, it's 2 instances, web server 1 and web server 2. These 2 are assigned to a combination of 2 different security groups, namely common SG and web servers. And their sort of cumulative or effective policy based on that multi-security group membership is listed here. And for 2 kind of relatively modestly defined security groups, this isn't impossible to figure out on your own. But imagine 5 relatively robust security groups being assigned to a single resource, and then all of a sudden you've got a rule set, an effective rule set that's difficult to understand, especially at a glance where you're trying to troubleshoot problems. And that's the idea behind the effective policy view within Clarity. So let's switch back to security group view. We'll talk about a few more things that Clarity really has as great capabilities. One of the things I like is that if I'm a security practitioner and I'm using Clarity maybe in kind of a consultant way, what I'm looking at isn't always well understood. Maybe this is a new customer, maybe it's a new network, and Clarity can really help me understand outside of the naming conventions, outside of the icons that are sort of automatically placed against the security groups based on the intelligence Dome9 has. I can also search this graphical representation of my VPC functionally. So under search here, yes, I can search for names, but I can also search by service and by port. So if I want to know, okay, in my VPC, and remember, they can get much more complex than this, of course, where am I serving standard web traffic, for example? Okay, That makes sense. I've got an application load balancer, a load balancer. I've got some web monitors and app servers. Okay, if I was serving web traffic out of my database server, I might want to look at why that is. Why do I have a security control that defines incoming HTTP when I probably don't need that? That's the kind of idea, right? And just go through, for standard services, for sensitive services like SSH, understand again where I'm running SSH. Where I have that service either locked down or very permissive, doesn't matter, where I have it defined in my VPC and in which security groups is that true. So I'm able to understand away from how things are named, how things are documented at a true kind of service delivery perspective. I can query this map to understand exactly where and what kind of traffic I'm serving. So that's very useful as well. One of the things that we did last year, at the start of last year, is that we incorporated VPC flow logging information into Clarity. So, up until that point, Clarity had been this great tool to understand, security, configuration, management, configuration consistency, where I do have a problem, what that problem exactly looks like, what are the ramifications or implications of that port exposure, for example. That's the kind of use case you bring to Clarity. Now, though, what we've done is we've gone out and we've fetched information, and I'll just check this box while we talk about it. We fetch VPC flow log information from AWS. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it is your firewall filter log delivered as a service, right? Traditionally, we would have a firewall. We would have it logging to disk. We would then have to take that firewall log and aggregate it up with the rest of them in our organization to our SIM tool of choice, for example, or whatever our log aggregation strategy entailed. Now with security groups and the security controls we have with AWS, we don't have to worry about any of that. The firewall filter logs we can consume as a service. So if you use that at AWS and you check that box here within Dome9, we'll fetch that information, bring it over dynamically, and we'll paint these little red legends in the bottom right of each security group. And these little red legends really tell you how much drop traffic each security group has processed relative to the rest. So I can see, for example, that my default security group and my DB server security group have dropped a lot more traffic than have web servers or App1 servers or MQ, message queue, right? So if I'm doing a regular audit, that's a really good place to start, right? Take a look at where all the drop traffic is. I'm either going to find that I've got maybe misconfiguration in my environment, right? Maybe I've got a service trying to send traffic to something that isn't listening properly, so we have a lot of drop traffic at that security group level. Or maybe something else going on that needs further investigation, right? I can look and understand, if I click one of these security groups, I can understand kind of at that intimate level every single request that was either accepted or rejected based on my firewall rule set. And I can understand, the source IP for those requests. I can do some digging around, geolocation. If I'm not familiar with that IP, I can see, oh, okay, this is I know that no part of my application probably, sits here in China. This may or may not be legitimate traffic. I can do some more digging. The default view is rejected, and that's because many data security standards dictate that you must log firewall traffic. You must log all rejected traffic. Most won't call out that you have to log everything, but certainly if you're security conscious and you find the value of this information, if you do log it all, then we'll bring it all into Dome9 as well. I like the all perspective myself a little bit better than just rejected because it tells me a bit more of a traffic story, right? I can understand requests, the associated responses, really get a feel for the traffic story. Like you can see here, I can see my database server sort of sending communication out to this IP, and then I can see this IP sort of responding, or vice versa. So it tells me a bit more of the story than does just the rejected traffic perspective. But depending on what you must log or what you feel is strategic, we will support you and really give you some human sort of readability. If you've worked with AWS flow logs before, they're not that different than firewall filter logs we're used to from the ASA days, for example, right? They are not all that human readable. So we'll bring them into Dome9. We'll correlate them into this kind of security group perspective and present them for you tactically. we find a lot of customers prior to this would consume flow logs, but then they dump them right to an S3 bucket, for example, for analysis later, maybe in the event of some troubleshooting or forensics. But we think the value in flow logs is great enough to be used, sort of day to day, tactically. They tell a great story around who's consuming resources at the edge. Do you have lateral movement through a VPC? Do you find do you find an IP address sort of come in through a service port definition at the edge and then sort of be able to manipulate through your network architecture based on your security controls? These are the kinds of questions that the combination of flow logs and then the analysis of the potential traffic flows, that can be answered with a tool like Clarity. So, that's the feature. There's certainly more to it from an operational perspective, kind of how you use Clarity. I think the use cases are large and largely different. But what's common between them is the pursuit of understanding your risk, understanding where relationships, including peered relationships. I should probably check that box to show you what that looks like. If you do have a peered relationship from this VPC out to a different one, we will bring that information in and illustrate it for you as an additional traffic source. If you have maybe a security group reference through that peering relationship, we will show you that. So, and as you can see in this case, it looks like that peering relationship maybe has been removed, but certainly if there is one, it'll become a new traffic source. You will see the security group name and the VPC name that it came from. Really, again, understanding within everything possible within sort of network architecture and security control administration on AWS and Azure, all that's possible. I should mention that we've used AWS in this example, talked a little bit about cloud formation templates, but this feature is equally as effective over at Azure. Clarity is Azure ready and can be used there as well. And as we support additional platforms, you will find Clarity support for those as well. Okay, so with that, let's just pop back to the slideshow portion, and we'll wrap up and talk a little bit about some of the other things Dome9 does and how you can get your hands on Dome9 and really evaluate this for yourself. Okay. So what we talked about today was security visualization, was Clarity. We have more tools, I think, that speak to that desire to get a lot more, either at a high level or a lot more low level understanding of, at any given time what your security controls look like. We have tools like policy reports. We have tools like the compliance engine and the new rule engine that allow you to, very, very in a very detailed way, understand how you stack up against other baseline measurements. For example, maybe it's an external data security standard like PCI or CIS, or maybe it's more of a benchmark that's best practice driven. Maybe it's even a benchmark that you want and need to define yourself. Getting very specific instead of a higher level kind of rules or observations around your infrastructure. Dome9 has a very specific product around AWS identity and access management, an additional layer of security using some out-of-band dynamic authorization to obtain access to the most very sensitive features afforded to us by AWS. That's a product we have called IAM Safety. So, it really does run the gamut. Our product family we call ARC, Assess, Remediate, and Control. And in there we have really, 3 products: network security, and Clarity definitely falls into that bucket. We have compliance, the compliance engine and governance, which is the feature we just talked about, and then we have the IAM Safety, the identity and access management, kind of a additional security layer. And then everything you do through Dome9 interactively, you can also do through the Dome9 API, and that's really important too. A lot of our customers say, geez, I would love to be able to automate the upload of a cloud formation template into Clarity, to have it sort of sitting there so that I can, I can come back and analyze as part of a workflow. Those kinds of things are possible with Dome9, right? Being able to, if it's an interactive feature like Clarity where you're looking at the screen and you're looking at the output to try and make some determination of your next step, then of course that's an interactive feature. But for everything else, including the upload of templates, including judging infrastructure, turning on features we have like tamper protection, which keep your configuration, your security control configuration trusted over time. All of that is administratable kind of via API as well as in the Dome9 web portal. similarly, the information that Dome9 generates, kind of the audit trail, the watchdog-like network monitoring that happens just as a as an aside, kind of using the platform, you can bring out into your SIM tool of choice, right? Your log aggregation strategy, your Splunk, your Sumo Logic, whatever it is, we can take that information out. So, no matter the use case, if you are a security practitioner that needs additional visibility and control of your public cloud infrastructure as a service environments, you will find a lot of value in Dome9. So with that said, if you'd like to get more information, please do reach out to me. I am at patrick@dome9.com. I can ensure that I get you the information you need to understand if Dome9 sort of fits your use case. I can also show you how to get started with Dome9 very, very easily for yourself. You can go to dome9.com where you can spin up your own 14-day evaluation, kind of wide open functionality evaluation to make sure that it fits your use case. With that said, thank you very much. I encourage you to visit dome9.com/webinars and sign up for more content we have coming your way in 2017. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.